Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the best builders in the galaxy. Come on in, come on in. All right, at the 2-minute mark, I'm gonna pause. Okay, I think we're almost about the 2-minute mark, but I just wanted to pause and welcome you all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. We had several versions of the intro music, but nothing beats the epic Star Wars theme. So we had to veto everything else and say, all right, let's give the fans what they want, right? So, you know, that was that. So welcome everybody. I'm KP. My full name is Karthik Puwara. I am the current program director at On Deck No Code, and I'm really excited to do a live build workshop with our friends and partners, Xano. And you know, we have from Xano's team, we have Prakash Chandran, who's joining us from California. And I, you know, we'll talk about it in a second, but I just wanted to give a few minutes for folks who are just gathering still. I think we have about, can't see the numbers, but I think about 34 people, which is good. We'll give another minute for folks to assemble.
And one Ewok.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Gary. Nice.
I love that, Gary. That's awesome.
I love that, Gary. We were all just showing each, you know, just before the call began, we're showing our memorabilia. You know, I was showing this poster that I got, as if my hat was not enough. And Prakash was showing off some of his Star Wars stuff too. But, you know, hi, Toby. Good to see y'all. There's so many familiar faces here, actually. Nice. It's like homecoming. Good to see y'all. Colleen, good to see you. Anyway, so we should get started. We only have 60 minutes, so I want to make the most of it. So today, as you may know, the theme of this live build workshop is getting your hands into Xano, and of course, using the Star Wars API and, you know, building something fun and cool. And we will be we will have this session led by Prakash, as I mentioned in the beginning. Prakash is currently the co-founder and head of product at Xano. He also hosts a popular podcast called Chapter One. And previously, he worked about 7 years at Google, and he led the UX design and research team at G Suite. I'm not going to waste any more time. And without further ado, invite our guest speaker, Prakash, to take over the screen and do his magic.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, KP. Can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so you should be able to see my screen.
Yep.
Yes? Okay, fantastic. So really excited to join all of you today and run this informative session on what APIs are and doing a build session with a Star Wars API, which is pretty amazing. So first of all, my name is Prakash. I am the head of product and one of the co-founders of Xano. Xano is the fastest way to build a scalable backend for your application without using any code. I wanted to kind of go through at a very high level what we're going to cover today. So first, I'm going to spend between 15 and 20 minutes just talking about an API or the API, what an API is and how it works and all the dynamics of that. I promise I'll try to make it fun and informative. And I know a lot of you will be like, hurry up and finish so we can get to the Star Wars piece. But I promise it's a really good foundation for you to learn to really appreciate what we're going to be doing with the Star Wars API. So we'll take First 20 minutes, what is an API? 25 minutes with the Star Wars API, and then 15 minutes for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's just talk about how software is traditionally built today. So typically you have a front end and a back end, and the front end is what the user sees, and the back end is where all of the business logic and business operations happen. It's where kind of 90% of that workload happens. And the example I always like to give is that imagine, for example, in Amazon's one-click buy, the user might just see a button, buy now, but in the back end, it has to orchestrate inventory checks and all of the things to process payments and all of those things. And that is what the back end does. And so the reason why it's important to understand the front end and the back end is because that's where the API lives. And to talk about the API and its role in the back end, I always like to use a restaurant analogy. So when you go to a restaurant, for example, you'll have a customer, and that customer will place an order with a waiter. That order might be something like, I want a cheeseburger with extra mustard. That waiter takes that custom order, gives it to the kitchen to make the order. The kitchen gives the food to the waiter and makes a happy customer. So in this metaphor, the customer is the front end. That's the app or website. That's the thing that sends the commands to the waiter. And the waiter is the API. They're the messenger that runs back and forth between the front end and the server and the database, which is the kitchen, to really get things done in your application and make things work in your app. And so the waiter is a really important piece, and that's what the API is, that messenger that connects things together. So now that you kind of understand what the API's job is in the back end, it's just important to know that APIs are the glue of the internet. They're really the things that connect one service together with another. So going over at a very high level, the different services that you might be familiar with, think about something like Google Maps, right? Google Maps has its own API or waiter, right, that you can then access to query all of the world's location, latitude and longitude. Why would you want to do this? Well, if you're building, for example, an app that displays things on a map, you're not going to want to rebuild a whole map and latitude, longitude, track everything. You want to use a service that's already done this for you. So you'd use the Google Maps API. Similarly, there's Stripe, right? Stripe takes payments and makes it very easy for you to charge your users on a recurring basis or a one-time basis. And they handle all of the banking information, the transactional information. You just plug right into their API. And then a little less known is a company called Twilio, and they're traditionally known for handling SMS and email capability. So these APIs, basically when you're building apps, you can leverage all of these different APIs for your app. A very popular app that you might know, Airbnb, leverages all three of these APIs. It'll use Google Maps to show the different locations that you're searching for, Stripe to take your payments when you make a booking, and then Twilio to send you SMS and email notifications when your booking is confirmed. And the cool thing about this is if you're building an app, you could leverage, for example, Airbnb's API that might be an accommodations API. So I just wanted to show this example because I wanted you to know that APIs connect one service to another, and then each API can leverage another API to build out the service. And another thing to note is that APIs don't just connect one service to another. They actually are used to connect your app to your users. So this is an important concept. Most people don't understand that it is also the mechanism that has you creating users, creating objects within your application. That's why APIs are so critical and important to understand. So now that you understand the dynamics of the API and where it sits in the backend and why they're so important, let's just talk about the different APIs that exist, okay? So I'm going to glaze over this at a very high level, but all you need to know is this first one, this REST API that you've probably heard about, basically is what most of the internet uses. It stands for representational state transfer. And this is the protocol that has become industry standard. Older standards are JSON RPC or SOAP. And then one that's upcoming that actually leverages the REST protocol is GraphQL. And I'm just going to explain it at a high level so you understand what it is. But GraphQL basically was created by Facebook. And when you're looking at the comment feed or the wall feed and you see these comments, sometimes you'll have a wall post. Then you have comments associated with it. Then you have likes. Sometimes that can be like 3 or 4 or even 10 different API calls, which can be a heavy load to the server. So GraphQL was invented to basically make that performant, to pull all of that data in one API request. Luckily, with a tool like Xano, you can emulate GraphQL using the REST API protocol. So I just thought that's a very high level thing that you should understand. Just know that when you hear someone say, oh, we have a REST API or a RESTful API, it's what most of the internet uses. So that's what we're going to cover today. So now that we understand that, let's talk about the anatomy of an API call and how it actually works. So using that restaurant metaphor, right, you have that customer, and that customer can be a web or your mobile application. That customer makes a request to that API, that waiter, and that request then gets sent to the server for processing. Afterwards, that server, once it's done processing the request, it'll generate a response and then send it back to that customer, okay? So let's look at the request itself, okay, and the different types of requests that exist. So when we look at the request, there are 4 primary ones. It's create, read, update, and delete. These are called CRUD operations. You've probably heard of this before. And these are all the basic things of, like, let's say you had a kitchen table with all your food. You could create food items, you could read them, you could update them and delete them. Each one of these commands has an associated HTTP method, and that is post, get, put, and delete. And so we're going to go over these dynamics in a second, but just know that there's CRUD operations and each one is associated with one of the HTTP methods that you see over here on the right. So let's actually do an example request and walk through one together. So one request might be, if using this restaurant metaphor, how many cheeseburgers are in my kitchen? So let's construct what the anatomy of this request might look like. So every API request has a method or operation. What do you want to do? So in this scenario, I want to get from the server those cheeseburgers. The second thing is the API endpoint URL. So you can see over here, I might have like my website.com/API/kitchen. All the way up until that API, that's called the base request URL. So that's what I'm calling to access the API. And the kitchen piece of it is called the resource, because I'm accessing the resource kitchen from my API. So the anatomy of every request has that endpoint URL. Where are you going? What data do you want to select? The next thing it has is headers. So headers typically have authentication, encoding, caching, and things that are extra envelope information about the request. The most important thing about the headers is probably authentication. So when you are hitting an API endpoint that's secure, you might need to pass a token or a username and password to get a token back from your server. And then finally, input parameters. What are you getting back from the user? So remember, I said I wanted to see how many cheeseburgers were in my kitchen. So the input parameter, I might have like a text box on my app that asks for what food item do you want? They might type in cheeseburger, so the server can then process it, okay? So let's move on to the response piece of it. Now that we've looked at the anatomy of the request, let's look at the response and what that looks like. So the server is always going to send back a response that has 3 major components. The first is the status code. Status code 200 means everything is good, right? Like we've done this request successfully, 200 is good. And if you want to know the different status codes of an API, you can just type in status code API in Google and you will see all of them. Like 401 is typically that. Headers will have things like date, time, server type, and things of that nature. And then finally, the result. And the result is what's sent as a JSON object. So you'll sometimes hear people saying, oh, JSON object or JSON payload. Some people say JSON. I actually don't know what the correct, how you say it correctly, but it stands for JavaScript object notation. And that basically is the payload that is being sent from the server back to your application based on what the user requested. And so for this specific example, before we kind of get into the Star Wars one, because it's easy for me to do, I'm just going to build out this example in Xano so you can see what a JSON payload might look like. So I'm going to go into Xano very quickly, and I have a user database table, but I'm going to go ahead and just create one called kitchen. And you can see it's going to automatically add those CRUD operations, those CRUD endpoints for me. So create, read, update, and delete. So I'm going to add this kitchen table, and then I'm going to add 2 fields. I'm going to add one called item, and that's going to be the different food items in my kitchen. And then I will also add an integer called quantity. That's how many are remaining. So I might have something like cheeseburger, right? That's the request that we wanted. And I'm just going to say 5. And then I'm going to do fries, and I'll say 3. And then I'll do soda, and I'll do 1. And I know this is not Star Wars, it's coming, but I'm giving you this good primer here. So now that we have this kitchen API table, I'm going to go to this default API group. I can see this get kitchen over here, and this is our no code API builder in Xano. It's what inputs are given by the user, what functions are run, and then what does it return to the front end. Right now, it's going and getting all of the items from kitchen and returning it to the front end. So when I run and debug this, I can see that I'm getting all 3 of the items that I just created in my database table. But I want to get an input from the user. Remember, in that request, I wanted the cheeseburger. So I'm going to add an input. I'm going to type in a text field, and I'm just going to call it requested item. And I could call it anything that I want, but I'll just go ahead and do that. And then here, I can filter all the records that I'm getting back. And I want to make sure that the requested item, that's the input that I just put in, actually equals kitchen.item. So in the database table kitchen, I want to make sure that it's equal to the item that is being requested by the user. So now when I run this API endpoint again, right, and I type in cheeseburger, I should only see the cheeseburger being returned. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation and understand a little bit more about what this means. So you can see this is the JSON response that I'm getting back, okay? And that what most people don't realize is that JSON response is actually what's rendered in your application. So you would basically, in your front end, whether you're using a no-code tool or a JavaScript framework, you would take this JSON response and you would say, okay, this response.item display as cheeseburger here on the right, and then I would use that quantity 5 to say something like 5 remaining, okay? So I hope this gives you a reasonable primer around what APIs are, how they work, where they sit in the back end, and how the request gets sent to the server, and then a response gets sent back as JSON, and that JSON then gets rendered into your application. So this is just a good primer to kind of get us started to really appreciate what's next, and what's next finally is the Star Wars Planet Finder. So super excited to do this with you. And of course, because I'm a nerd, I wish I could have the music going. That's what I should have done, KP. I should have done like the Star Wars theme song right now. But in any case, here's what we're going to build. I'm going to do a live build out of this using Xano. A long time ago in a galaxy far away, we're going to create an app that allows Star Wars fans to look up their favorite planets from the Star Wars film, right? And so let's talk about what we need here. The first thing that we need is an API to query the Star Wars planets. And lo and behold, one actually exists, which is amazing, which I'll show you in a minute. The second thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out a way for people on the front end to query the planets by their names, okay? And the third thing we're absolutely going to need is a lightsaber, absolutely. So let's move this forward a little bit, and let's go to this URL called Swapi.dev, and that stands for Star Wars API. So this is an amazing resource just because why not? Why wouldn't there be a Star Wars API that has things like planets and starships and vehicles and peoples and films, everything you would ever want from the Star Wars universe. And so you can see over here, this is a public API. Anyone can access it. And immediately I can see that Luke Skywalker is here under people. But for example, if I wanted to get planets, I could just say /planets. I could hit the request, and I can see the request coming back with the different planets within the Star Wars film, okay? So the cool thing about this is that I have all the planets available. But going back to my presentation, you can see that we need a way for people to search by planets by name, right? And if I go back to the API, I can see that the planets are by number. So if I went to planets /1, for example, I can see that's Tatooine. But the problem is that, let's say I'm building an app, a planet finder, I'm not going to ask or expect users to understand what ID like Dagobah is or Tatooine is, right? They're going to want to just type in the name of the planet. So how do we do this? And this is an important point that I want you to know. Sometimes you're going to have the right API, but it's not going to be in the format that you're looking for. And that's no pun intended, but you're going to need to manipulate it to make sure that you can take in the name and actually feed back the data that you want. So here we go. So let's go ahead and start working this in Xano. And I'm going to show you one by one, and we're going to use all of the knowledge that we've learned at the front of this presentation and what we're going to do here in Xano. So we just did this kitchen API. Let's go into my Star Wars API group, and I'm going to go ahead and start from scratch. So I'm going to click on Add API Endpoint. I'm going to start from scratch, and I'm going to just say Get Planets by name. Okay, so I'm going to click Save here. So this is, again, our no-code API builder. What inputs, what functions run, and then what are we returning? So we're starting with a clean slate. If I go back to my presentation, whenever you're building an API endpoint, especially when you're working with external APIs, you always want to think through the data, right? So in this case, I want to get a planet from a list of planets by name, right? So thinking through each one of these things really tells you the different types of functions that you need to use. And then you can start to procedurally break out step by step exactly what needs to happen. So let's look at step one over here. I want to get the planet the user wants, okay? So let's go back over here, and I'm going to add an input, right? And I'm going to call this input requested planet, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So again, what does the input do? This is that query parameter that I told you about in the request that takes whatever payload that the user wants to send over to communicate with the server. All right, the second thing that I want to do is I want to get all the planets from the Star Wars API. Okay, so we have the Star Wars planet API over here, and I just need /planets to get all of them. So let's make sure that that actually works. In my function stack over here, the no-code API builder, I'm going to hit this plus button, and I'm going to hit an external API request because we're hitting an external API. So I'll click external API request over here. And then in the URL, remember, in the body of the request, there's always that API endpoint URL. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in, and I'm going to say /planets, right? And I'll just go ahead and save this. There's thankfully no authentication. Whoever built this API has made it completely open and free, which is amazing. So now that we have this, we can say that there's one function. It goes to get this external API, and then it returns it as the variable API1. So I'm going to return this, and I'm just going to see what happens. It's asking me for a requested planet, but we're not even using that yet. So if I click run, I can see that I'm getting the exact same payload over here that I would get from their little test bed that they're showing on the Swapi.dev website. So I want to just break this down really quick. I'm going to just collapse this. Notice how what we covered before is all here. You have your request, right? That request has the URL, the Swapi.dev /API/planets. It has the method, we're getting the planets, and then example header information. We're not passing any parameters yet because I haven't hooked this piece up. So what it's doing is it's returning all of the different planets here, okay? So this is a pretty big JSON payload, right? There's a lot of information here. And actually, I don't really want the request information or the headers. All I want is this information, the results that show me all of the planets. So one of the cool things that you can do in Xano is you can take all of the response from the API and you can filter it down to just the response that you're looking for. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a create variable. And a variable is basically a container for information. And the way you create one is you go to data manipulation and you click on create variable. And I'm just going to call this variable name planets, right? Because I'm going to take that lots of information and I'm just going to filter it down to just the planets that I'm looking for. So here in the value, I'm going to go into this API1, which is what the results that I'm getting from that Star Wars API return. And I'm going to go into subpath, right? And subpath is just a way for us to paste in the payload from the Star Wars API over here that we're getting. and it allows us to automatically drill down into exactly what we're looking for. So here, this is the JSON payload I got. I just want the results, right? So I'm just going to click on this results button right here. And you can see what it's doing is it's saying, okay, we're going to take what we're getting back from this third-party API, and we're going to drill down using this thing called dot notation just into the results that we're looking for here. So I'm going to save this, and you can see it's returning that as planets. So if I change the return here to just planets and save it, if I run it again, I can see now that I don't have any of that header information anymore. I only have the planets, which is great. That's exactly what I want to work with. Okay, so now that I've returned just the planets, what is the next thing that I want to do? I want to loop through the list of each planet, right? And I want to see if the user's requested planet is in that list, then I want to return that planet back to the front end, okay? So now that I have a list of planets, I want to iterate through each one of them to see if whatever the user's requesting is actually in this list of planets. So let's go ahead and add a new function here. And I'm going to click on data manipulation over here, and I'm going to do a loop, and I want to do a for each loop over here. And I'm going to loop through each one of these planets. So the list that I'm going to use is the planets, right? That's what I've refined down over here. And then in terms of each planet, I'm just going to call it planet. So I'm going to go through a list of planets. Each one is going to be called planet. And then what I want to do is I want to add a conditional, right? Because remember, what do I want to do? If the user's requested planet is in that list, then return the planet to the user. So I'm going to say data manipulation. I'm going to do a conditional, and I'm going to say that if the input, that requested planet from the user, is equal to, remember that single planet is just called planet.name, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and save this. So what I'm saying again, I got all the list of planets from the Star Wars API. I refined it down to just the planet names without the header information. I'm looping through each one of the planets as each individual planet. And I'm saying if what the user has typed in is equal to the planet that I'm getting back, then what I want to do is I'm going to then create a new variable with just that planet information. So I'm going to create the variable here. I'm going to call this planet results. And then in the value, I'm just going to return that found planet over here. And I'm happy to answer questions about all this stuff. But again, going through the API, going through the list of planets, making sure that the requested planet is matches up, and then returning the planet itself. And then here in the response, I just want to return this planet result over here. So now I'm going to go ahead and select planet results. I'll click save. And then when I run this again, I'm going to say Tatooine. And in theory, if I've done this right, I should only get back Tatooine and all of the information about Tatooine, right? And if I want to do Dagobah, right? Now I'll just go ahead and I just get the Dagobah information over here. So yeah, this basically shows you how I was able to take this Star Wars API, right? I was able to use this external API. I was then able to go into Xano and take this API, and instead of getting the planets by numbers, I was able to use a query parameter here as requested planet and then return it back to the front end. So what I would do at this point is take that endpoint URL, and then I would pass it to my front end. So if I were building a front end in something like Bubble or React or Adalo or whatever front end you're going to use, all you would need is that input from the user, a little input field that would take that requested planet, and then the backend basically serves it via the API. So I went through that much faster than I thought I was going to. So what I'm going to do is I'll just open it up for Q&A at this point. I see there's a lot of people or a lot of questions in the chat over here. And
so there's one specific one about just what you just showed, Prakash.
Yep.
Around where would the user make it so that the end user can input lowercase or uppercase and still search would work fine?
Yes. So what you can do, so the first thing that you see here is that like Tatooine, the way that the Star Wars API serves back the data is they are always making the first letter capitalized, right? So what you can do here in Xano is on the conditional statement where you're evaluating, right? You're basically getting the name from the API. You can add a filter, for example, right? So if I added a filter, there's all types of text filters that you can do to transform what you're getting back from the user, right? So, or actually, I want to do it on the input. So this is the input. I want to add a filter. And in this case, for example, I'll use the capitalized filter, right? So what this means is even if they type in lowercase Tatooine, or let's just type in lowercase d, it's going to automatically capitalize it and return back the Dagobah. So the answer to the question is, depending on what API you're using, you would use text filters over here to manipulate this. And there's also one called to lowercase, to uppercase, but in this case, the Star Wars API always capitalizes that first letter.
Sweet.
Okay, awesome. So I can't tell if there's a lot of Star Wars things going on here. So I'm trying to find questions within it.
I think there was one that stood out for me from Joe. Is something around, is that function adding a sort in parallel to the fetch request? When you so when you pulled the payload from the API, was it
Yep.
already coming in a sorted fashion? If so, what kind of sort was applied on it?
Yeah, so there's no, so just looking at the planets here, if I just do the request over here, there doesn't look like there's any sort of sort on it. However, it is something that you're able to do within Xano. You can see, for example, there should be a created at date. Yeah, there it is, created and edited, right? So in theory, if you store this, you should be able to sort it by this way if you really wanted to. That's a little more complex because you're dealing with their sorting mechanisms, but you're able to basically store it within the function stack and then reorder it if you would like. Are there any more questions about APIs in general, about how APIs work, or kind of the walkthrough that I did with this Planet Finder?
What is the best way to approach designing like the endpoints? I mean, this is just one endpoint. Could there be dozens, I assume?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So the endpoints that Gary's talking about over here are these specific commands that messenger, the API, knows to go do something. So for this particular one, we've trained this messenger to get the planets by name, right? It takes an input and it executes this out. So depending on how you structure your application, you're going to build more and more endpoints. So there's just this one over here. I'm going to go into my default API group that Xano automatically creates to show you what like a more fleshed out application looks like. So you saw kind of, I have in my database, I have kitchen and user. Typically what you would want to do is you have your CRUD operations with each basically entity that you have. So I'll just use this back to this kitchen example. You can see I have /kitchen and then all of the items for kitchen. So the more things that you have related to things within the kitchen, you would basically use / and then you would build out your individual API endpoints from there. That's just good hygiene around it. To be honest, you can structure it any way you want, but typically when you're working with a team that's working with APIs, you want a logical taxonomy that they're able to follow. Any other questions about API? You can feel free to unmute and ask. That's totally fine.
Not necessarily in the API part, but I mean, I have a question, Prakash. But is there a way for you to design maybe a form using Xano that's not where usually the way you did it was like the user, in this case you, was inputting Tatooine in that block you showed us earlier, right? Not
Correct.
here, but like in
Yeah.
the Xano, right? Is there a way to like design a form where you can take input from the user?
So you're saying, so right now what I've done is I've gone to Star Wars, and the form, there's only one field, right? That's the
Right.
requested planet.
Right.
And so on the front end, what you would do, like we just called this requested planet. We could call that anything that we want. But
Right.
it basically inputs is like a form, like it's what you're taking in from the user.
So then my question there is, can you email me something like that, like an external URL that comes out of this input to get my input into your function? You see what I mean?
I just want to understand, when you say, can I email you something? What does that mean?
As in, like, is there like a way to generate external link that you would share with somebody to get them to input, a field, in this case, like a planet name or whatever name you design,
I see what you're saying. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So typically what you would do is you would take this this endpoint URL, and then you would connect it over to a service, right? With that input. And then
Right.
like a service like a bubble or something like that. And then you would list out the input directly there, and then it would list out the endpoint of the different planets.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that we just focus on the API today. And so I didn't want to do a front end piece of it. But if any of you want to see how that's done, you can just ping me. I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat. You just go ahead and ping me, and then I'm happy to do a Loom video and show you how you would connect it to something like any front end. But basically that's how it would work.
So I had a quick question for you in regards to the different front ends that you can work with. So I've worked with Softer, worked with Bubble, starting to learn Webflow, etc. And so as far as it goes for the front end, I'm very familiar that Xano can basically work with any front end that you do. But the question I have is more so its limitations in working with various APIs. So for example, I run a huge amount of data through Shopify. And one of the biggest frustrations I've had is working with no-code solutions and trying to find ways to integrate with Shopify's API. So would Xano be a solution to that problem and allowing us to be able to sync or to interact with basically any API we wanted, but in a no-code fashion?
Yes. So RJ, thanks for the question. In theory, there should be no limitation as long as Shopify has a RESTful API, and I know that it does because we do have some users that use Shopify. You should be able to pull in data through Xano and then push it back to Shopify or vice versa. We actually have a lot of users that use Xano as an intermediary to transform data, just like we've done here, right? We've basically taken an API that maybe didn't work as well for us because it's taking in a number value and it's transforming it to where it can take a name. So I don't know your specific Shopify use case, but you're certainly able to do that transformation there.
You answered it. That was the exact problem, is that I was running into a wall where it was like, wow, like we were able to do so much with no code. We built our own affiliate program, we built our own partner program, we built all these things, but the Shopify API is just so large that there's just so much I can do, and we were having a lot of issues with it. So I think you just hit the nail on the head there.
Awesome. Thanks, RJ.
Good evening, Mr. Prakash.
Hey, Q-Brute, how are you?
I'm good, and you, sir?
Good.
Okay, I just want to be sure about this. Can you really say that an API is just like a reflection of the fields and records within a table in a database, like a kind of a reflection of what is contained within the field and the records within a table in a database?
It can be, yes, it 100%. There's two major roles that an API can play. So you saw me create this kitchen database table, right, with cheeseburger, fries, and stuff. This is a simple example. If I look at the related API endpoints, there are ways for me to get the information from the kitchen, to create information, to delete items, or to delete an individual item. So an API is often used to query the database, as you're saying, it's that reflection. However, an API cannot touch the database at all, like we've done with Star Wars. We didn't do anything with the database here. We basically just used that messenger example that I told you about to get an external API to transform the data and then to send it back to the front end. So there are many ways that you can certainly work with an API that don't touch the database. So I want to make it clear that even though data APIs are used to fetch data from the database and manipulate it, they can also be used to transform the data and never touch it.
All right, thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I ask, recently I had to grab some information that was in an object that was nested inside. And so I had to grab a big page of results like the planets here, and then inside one of the keys value was a URL, and nested inside that was another object. I had to grab information from that. Do you have an example, or can you show an example of how to, I guess, merge objects in that sort of example, if there's like a nested one inside a keys value? If that makes sense.
If I think I know what you're, so let me go ahead. I'm going to hide some of these things. And I just want to start with the first thing, or this first line item over here, okay? So this first line item, what we've done is we've hit this Star Wars API, and we're then returning all of the results that they're sending us. So if I go ahead and run this, right? And I'm just gonna, yeah, so the input doesn't matter because I haven't mapped it to anything yet. So when I run this, I'm gonna get that entire payload, right, of everything. And so I think what you're saying is, like, let's say you want to access like this URL that's nested inside of it. Is that correct? Okay. So the easiest way to do this within Xano is to copy the result as JSON. So this step one is you copy what you're getting back. And we're going to make ways to make this easier over time. But for right now, this is what you do. You copy the result. The next thing that you want to do is you want to create a variable. And for those of you that don't know variables, I've done a great video explaining how variables work, but it's basically a container for anything that you want. You can put text in there. You can put a massive payload of JSON in there. You can put anything you want. So I'm going to go data manipulation, create variable, and I'm just going to call this just the URL. Okay. On the value, what I want to do is I want to reference this API one, this variable, and I'm going to click subpath because I want to drill into it. Okay. So I'm going to click subpath, and then I'm going to paste in that payload. And then I just click define. And then this allows me to then traverse exactly what I want. So I'm going to go into the results, and I'm going to click URL. So this is getting the first URL back from that. So if I just, let me just go ahead and run this, and I'll return just the URL here. And then if I hit run and debug, I just should get back that first URL. Now, if I wanted all of the URLs, you can see it's .0. .0 means the first item. With APIs, the zero index is always your item number one. So you can just remove that .0 and just leave that .url. And it's going to then return all of the URLs that are in that payload. So that's how you would go about doing it. Does that make sense, Joe?
It does, as I'm like on my own learning that whole thing myself. I think that answered at least most of my questions. But the issue I ran into in this other thing was inside one of those URLs. Okay. Was a whole separate object that I needed to access.
Inside the URL?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I didn't know if you could explain how you might do that with this, because that makes sense, how to grab the URLs, to grab those strings.
Okay.
But if there was something nested inside, like another bit of information, another object nested inside one of those URLs, is there an easy way to do that, to grab that information?
So it should, in theory, if that's the case, it should show up here as a browsable result if it was truly another object in the URL. But gotcha. Yeah, but what I would also recommend is if that, like, just for, if this is a little bit more involved, definitely sign up for our office hours, which I think you have the link to, and then we can work that out, or just send a link to our support, and we'll definitely get that. But you should be able to browse it using this subpath feature.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, simple or complex, like about APIs in general, or about what we've done here today with the Star Wars API?
How concerned should we be about API rate limits? Because I've had some problems with that, returning errors and things like that on production applications in the past.
You're talking about hitting an external API?
Yeah, so like the Star Wars API, for example, let's say you build a fan website that relies on that, and you're getting a lot of traffic and it's making all these requests. At some point, you reach a limit.
Totally.
How concerned should we be about that?
So I believe they should there we go, rate limiting. Most external APIs will always tell you what their rate limit is. Like they usually have documentation around it. So what this is currently saying is that it's limited to 10,000 API requests per day. Okay, which means that you're gonna hit it. You're gonna hit this API 10,000 times before it just stops working for you. There are ways around this though. Let's say you, like, for example, the planets in Star Wars aren't going to change. Like, so there's no need to keep hitting the API. You should actually, there might be a way where you can save or cache the information, and then you never hit the API again until maybe a month from now. So that's a more advanced thing called response caching, which we have documentation for, and I won't cover because this is a more basic course, but you can certainly do that to prevent the rate limiting. So I think the simple answer to your question is always look at a documentation of an external API you want to use to look at rate limiting. But the more complex answer is there's ways around hitting that rate limit.
Thank you.
Hey, Prakash, there's a question from Jose about GraphQL and add-ons. Maybe you want to address this, but he says, Prakash mentioned something like Xano can emulate a GraphQL with REST. I believe this is a Xano feature, add-ons. Just wondering why Xano is offering not directly GraphQL, but like an emulation. Just curious for the reason for it.
Yeah, no worries at all. So I think Graph is something that we eventually want to support, but it obviously requires a little bit more complexity to just import Graph and have it work within Xano. That being said, you can still connect to a Graph endpoint, but we wanted to so with GraphQL, sometimes the way that it works is it's a little black box, meaning that you want to get additional information, but you don't know exactly how it's retrieved. So when we were building the add-ons framework feature, we tried to make it to where you could go into the individual add-on to manipulate how that additional data was being requested. So for those of you that aren't following that Facebook example, if I get a wall post, I want the associated likes and comments and sub-comments and sub-likes. The way GraphQL does it, you don't have any control. You just say you want it and it just magically does it. But sometimes the queries can get slow, especially at scale. So we wanted to introduce a framework add-ons that allow you more control. That being said, it is on our roadmap to allow you to import Graph one day, and it'll just kind of map to our existing add-on framework. So hopefully that will be someday soon. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment. I've been heavy into no code for over a year now, and this is by far the best no code presentation I've ever attended, period. I think that you hit the nail on the head, and if you guys have a solution to one of the major roadblocks in no code, which is working with external APIs. So props to you guys. This is incredible, and I plan to sign up immediately and really start to dive deep.
Thank you so much, RJ. I really appreciate that. And just so you know, so if you go to xano.co/ODNC, we have a discount there for people that are interested in signing up. I know KP and Janelle will talk further about their third cohort, so definitely stick around for that because that's super exciting, and we've been really blessed and honored to be partners with them. And then just another thing with that regarding Xano, we're going out to Product Hunt on the 12th. We would love your support if you're around for that. And then definitely go to our tutorials. We basically break down a lot of the complexities around connecting to external APIs, around transforming data. And then we're also super hands-on. We do orientation and office hours multiple times a week. So even if you have simple questions like, I still don't understand how an API works, please help me. It's really important to understand because a lot of people, and I know the people that are a little bit more advanced on this call, this will seem very intuitive, but Zapier is really just doing API calls for you, external API calls. So a Zap is going from one external API and connecting to another. But when you don't have a Zap for the thing that you're looking for, you have to get into the world of APIs, which is why it's so important for us that you understand how APIs work and how to work with them. So, so anyways, RJ, thank you for the compliment. We're definitely here to help.
Awesome. Sweet. I'm sure we'll hear more on Twitter or whatever. We'll get feedback from you guys on today's session. I for one have always been a big fan of both Xano, but also mainly Prakash and their team, especially in early stages. So much about a tool is really about the drive and the initiative and the willingness to help the community, from the founding team and the people who work there. And Xano has been an exemplary partner for us from the get-go when we announced ODNC 1. So I'm grateful. And as a segue to what we're kind of building in the third cohort, which is, by the way, applications are open right now. So if you're interested, this is a sampler of what kind of events we have within the program. We have an 8-week program. The community is lifelong, but this particular programming and the curriculum is for 8 weeks. It's intensive. It's the thing that you need if you're on the fence in the no-code world. It's a forcing function. Like Gary, who's asked a bunch of questions earlier, he's one of those people who doesn't really need a no-code program. But to me, the way he's joining ODNC 3, to me, what I'm noticing is a lot of people love to nerd out, jam out more than just one session. They want to spend a summer camp in no code, right? And this is probably the best gift you can give yourself if you work in tech, because this is happening right now at a large scale. No code's mainstream now. We're seeing so many people raise money and becoming full-time founders with no code MVPs and so on. But even at work, the productivity gains are massive. So I'm not going to sit here and pitch about no code, because I think if you're interested in this session, you already know the values and the benefits. But personally, I want to say that, if there's a community around you, rallying around you, and supporting both the highs and the lows, the trials and tribulations that you have as a no-coder, that's what we aim to build at ODNC. So we have application going on right now. If you're interested, that's the link, beyonddeck.com/no-code or odnc.io, which will read out to this. Go ahead and apply, and I'll see you. One of us will see you in the interviews, and hopefully we'll have you in the cohort, and you can jam out even more with Prakash and Michael and everybody on Xano's team within the cohort.
And just another thing that I'll say just around the partnership, we've made a lot of great friends through ODNC. A lot have become customers. I want to give a shout out to some of those people that are on the call. Thank you all for supporting us so much. And it's about community here, especially the no-code community, which is ever growing and really tight knit. And Colleen, I don't know if you're still on the call. She's actually created a resource, APIs for no-coders.com. And, we know that the concept of APIs, like all of us in the community, it's not just us at Xano, we understand how important it is for you all to understand these concepts. So definitely check this out as well. There are so many resources out there from the no coders in the community to help out. So I just wanted to give that plug as well. As you go on your journey, if you're at the beginning of your journey learning what an API is, check these resources out. And definitely, I can't recommend ODNC enough, because it's not only going to teach you about a lot of these concepts, but you're going to have a cohort of people that you're going to learn with, that you're going to have a bond with, and KP and Janelle and everyone at the ODNC team is really just incredible. I think it's really an experience of a lifetime. So I can't recommend it enough. And yeah, thanks again for letting us be partners with you, KP.
Of course. Thank you so much, everybody. We will be emailing you. Hopefully, I was just chatting with Janelle. Hopefully, we can get a recording out of this and maybe include that in your email. But there are tremendously useful and actionable tutorials from Xano on YouTube. That's where I go to if I need like a quick intro to a certain topic on Xano. Please go check that out. It's, again, I'm not plugging because they're partners. It's genuinely one of the best content pieces in the no-code space right now. So check it out, and we'll see you in a future session. We're planning to do a lot more open public sessions like this. The next one is going to be on software. So if you're interested, stay tuned. I'll post it on my Twitter. Janelle was going to post it on Twitter, and we'll see you in one of our future build sessions. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you so much.